The Syria crisis has now entered its 7th year, claiming the lives of hundreds of thousands while displacing millions. It has proven to be difficult to get unbiased, reliable information during this multi-sided conflict, which has now reached a critical stage.
Syria? A cultural, ethnic, and religious mosaic of a country with 74% Sunnis, 13% Shias, 8 to 12% of which are Alawites, and about 2% Murshidis, 3% Druze, about 10% Christians. Additional ethnicities include Syrian Kurds, Turkmens, Armenians, Circassians, Greeks, Malami, Yezidis, Shabaks, and Mandians.
There's so many ethnic groups in Syria, it's hard to determine who's who. Kind of confusing for outsiders to try to get involved and to learn about.
Syria, a nation under siege with multiple forces involved from many sides by multiple factions and nations. We have Assad's forces, Kurds, PYD and YPG, FSA, Al-Nusra, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Ahrar Al-Sham, Faylaq Al-Sham, and we have multiple nations and their bases such as Turkey, Iran, Russia, US-NATO, and Israel.
This situation in Syria, it's very difficult to report objectively what is happening. We have multiple sides, and every side says the other side is bad.
Newsbud spoke with Ariana Love, who lived in Gaza, Jordan, and now Finland. She is the Goodwill Ambassador to Palestine. As an independent journalist and author, she has been covering the refugee crisis in the Middle East and Europe.
I was interviewing Iraqi refugees, mostly from Mosul, which was under ISIS control for a long time. Most of them actually passed through Syria and on into Turkey. They said the same thing, to be careful who I talked to in the camps, and that there were some people that were not trusted. And I think the authorities here in Finland, as well as the rest of Europe, they have a very hard time determining who's really a victim and who is a plant.
Whether pro-Syrian government, anti-Syrian government, or just neutral, these are the victims paying the highest price of being torn by this multi-sided war, with hundreds of thousands of lives lost, many more injured, millions of displaced and refugees, and homes turned into rubble and dust. With so many factions involved, so many divided geographical areas, and so many diverging foreign interests, how do journalists go about factual and unbiased reporting on Syria?
Chris Miletis has been a researcher and investigative journalist for nearly 20 years. For the last several years, Chris has provided extensive coverage on the Syrian war and the refugee crisis. He is a writer and a correspondent for Newsbud.com based in Greece.
So if a journalist has a certain ideology or is sympathetic to someone, then he's not going to do his job very good.
How can this be done through ethical journalism, but most importantly, with human decency?
I had to literally write everything down in notes by hand. If there was a camera, they wouldn't talk to me. People wouldn't talk to me. And they said the reason for this is because most of these refugees still had families inside Syria.
It's not just going to Syria and just taking pictures and doing like some activists do. There's a lot of real good activists I know that came to Syria and have been straightforward, and they've been real sincere about Syria. But I don't think all of them have done that. Some of them have their agendas.
First of all, we must not take sides. We must know that everyone is capable of anything.
We also spoke with Rebecca Baker, who has been a journalist for over 20 years and is currently the national president for the Society of Professional Journalists.
But you need to be upfront in your advocacy. If you for portraying yourself as a neutral news organization when you are not, when you're an advocacy organization, then that is dishonest and that's wrong.
How can outsiders sift through information and misinformation bombardment and detect facts versus agenda and bias-based reporting? The short answer, considering the circumstances and the multitude of interests and agendas, it is very difficult, but not impossible.
Most people, in the social media, most people post and share some the news because they believe it, not because they read it. Right. I mean, they see a title and they post it in seconds, in 10 seconds. They don't read it. It's a psychological issue. It reaffirms their belief. So someone who is like that cannot find the truth. He lost it.
In 2011, we were the first news organization to expose the US-NATO operation targeting Syria via Turkey. We were the first again to break the story on training camps in Jordan in preparation for the Syrian destabilization operations. We have continued our coverage over the years on the most important and blacked out stories involving the Syria crisis through our video reports, roundtable discussions, articles, and analysis. One of the most important principles in factual reporting: do not align yourself with a side or an interest, but if you do it in a transparent way and make it clear with a bold disclaimer. And as a reader and observer of the news, pay attention to whose side you're getting your information from and whose interests or agenda is being promoted. Remember the quote, "One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter." Well, when it comes to Syria, this is the case with every single faction.
When a report states something like Turkish forces neutralized and took out 132 terrorists in Syria and lost 3 Turkish martyrs, my first question always is, really? Who identified those killed as terrorists? Who is terrorists? How about the 7 babies and children who died during these operations? Are these babies terrorists? Who is in whose territory? Who's the invader? Who's engaged in defense? In order to get as close as possible to facts, I have to read dozens of other reports from multiple sites, including reports and documents posted by the Kurds, those announced in Russian publications, the ones put forth by Western media and other Arab nations, and even a multitude of social media posts by civilians in or near the area. Will doing all that get me bulletproof factual reporting? Maybe not. But it certainly will get me much closer to it than reading a particular government site with its own particular agenda or interest.
Let's be clear to something. You cannot go in Syria and be on the ground like an independent journalist without protection, without security, and report. You're going to be killed in 1 or 2 days, or you're going to be captured from someone. So the only way to report on the ground in Syria is to be protected by certain security forces, either be Assad or US forces or Russia's. Of course, if you're protected by, let's say, US forces, you cannot write something against US forces. Yes. Let's be clear to this. So actually, we don't have objective reporting from journalists on the ground, and every one of them that are on the ground, they support someone.
We all know about the Western mainstream media's track record when it comes to US-NATO perpetuated synthetic wars to further its imperialistic agendas. We had the long ago debunked Iraq WMD false news and propaganda. We had the already debunked reportage on the synthetically induced Arab Spring. We had the US-NATO scripted Libya debacle transmitted via their Western directed stenographers. So yes, many around the world were awakened, and now they distrust almost anything and everything put forth by those mainstream propaganda channels. Mainstream media has lost its credibility, and has been taking its last dying breaths. This phenomena has not been lost on the deep state. To keep up with the changing media landscape in the age of the internet and social media, the deep state players have been changing their tactics and utilizing alternative means as well, whether through social media or pseudo-alternative fronts posing as independent.
Many readers and viewers of the news, justifiably disgusted by and distrustful of the mainstream outlets, have been searching for and reaching out to alternative sources, alternative voices and outlets. With this fairly new trend arise many important questions and concerns as well. How do we establish the funding and biases of thousands of self-proclaimed journalists and activists who claim to be independent? How do we set journalistic standards and expectations such as fact-checking, verification, ethical practices, and liabilities for these sources? What are the responsibilities of readers and viewers within the online communities?
These questions and expectations are extremely important in order to address and deal with this new Wild West frontier of information in the age of internet and social media. Because without these standards, expectations, and responsibilities, we will end up facing consequences far more dangerous than we faced in the era of corrupt mainstream media domination. In this report, we will showcase some solid journalistic reports and practices. We will also highlight some of those who do not adhere to basic ethics and standards in their actions when reporting. We will document the pitfalls or potential dangers we are all faced with in this evolving media landscape and the gang mentalities and tactics carried out on social media. This report will focus on two of these self-proclaimed journalists, Vanessa Beeley and Eva Bartlett.
I became aware of Vanessa Beeley and Eva Bartlett about a year ago. It started with a few emails I received asking me to interview them and provide coverage for their reporting via Newsbud. Then I was contacted by a few other entities, including those associated with the Syrian Solidarity Movement, and was asked to provide coverage of Beeley Bartlett claims and reports. After cursory research and speaking with a few reliable sources, I decided that there were some serious questions without concrete answers to be found, such as their funding, their expertise and past experiences, their track record, some of their associates, and most importantly, their very black and white, very one-sided reports on Syria. With that, I decided not to interview them or disseminate their reports until further clarification.
We spoke with independent author and researcher Dr. Barbara McKenzie, who has traveled to Syria multiple times. Dr. McKenzie previously worked with Vanessa Beeley and Eva Bartlett at 21st Century Wire.
I became acquainted with a lot of people doing work on Syria because that's my own interest, having been to Syria myself, and that included Vanessa Beeley and Eva Bartlett, particularly Vanessa Beeley, and the relationship grew from there. I started writing things myself, which they promoted. I promoted their stuff, and I published some material through 21st Century Wire. So the relationship, what became a friendship of a kind, lasted about 2 years. So we had regular contact for most of that time at a personal level.
Zach Al-Sawaf is an American of Syrian origin, with both parents coming from Damascus. His father had important links with the governments of both Assads. Zach left the U.S. when he was 21, receiving a bachelor's degree in international studies at the American University of Kuwait and a master's degree in diplomacy at the American University in Dubai. Zach was living in Syria when the war began.
It began in March of 2011, and I left Syria. I was living in Syria at that time, teaching English, and I left in November of 2011. So I was there during the first 8 months of the war, and then I made 2 visits in 2013. I moved there in December of 2015 and stayed till May of 2016, and then I came back August and stayed all the way till May of last year. When I met Eva, she was there. We had a cup of coffee, and I was trying to figure. I actually invited her, and then she introduced me to him, and I invited him for a cup of coffee. And the funny thing is, I was very nice to them. I gave them my dad's book about Syria. He wrote this he started it in the year 2000, finished it in 2005. It's called Syria and the Struggle Continues for the Greatest Middle East. And it was like my dad was predicting these events coming up, like right now, the Syrian crisis. So he felt it was coming, but he didn't know exactly when. I gave her the book, and I had an extra book with me. So I was like, hey, why don't I just give it to him? I dropped her off at the station to go to Lebanon. I gave her some money, as she's saying that she didn't have that much money and she needed money for a camera or a laptop.
I spoke at length with Paul Larudi, one of the board members of the Syrian Solidarity Movement in the United States, whom I had met in the past and whose work I respect. He was very frank about his work with the movement. He told me that his last visit to Syria was in 2013 because the Syrian government has been rejecting his subsequent entry visa requests. During this conversation, he was very candid about Bealey and Bartlett's lack of qualifications as either journalists or analysts, their lack of in-depth knowledge when it comes to the Middle East and Syria, absence of educations or any knowledge in geopolitics and journalism, and the absence of quality, fact-checking, and verification in their work.
We spoke with another former colleague of Bealey, Scott Gulke, who worked with her for several years and is referred to as Navsteva throughout this report. Gulke is a former congressional candidate and an expert on Syria and the Middle East. Gulke, or Navsteva, also testified to Bealey's complete lack of knowledge and naivete on Syria and the Middle East in general. Navsteva also provided documentation of Bealey's not-so-long-ago past, where she held a very anti-Assad, anti-Syria, and anti-Iran position. Promoting the CIA-manufactured Arab Spring. As well as suggesting President Assad was responsible for the chemical weapons attacks in Ghouta in 2013. Even accusing the Syrian government of torture while promoting the US war on terror that was seeking regime change in Syria. These tweets were later scrubbed, and Bealey asked Navsteva to keep them secret. Bealey often sought Navsteva's expertise and research on Syria and the White Helmets for her own reports without providing credit.
We would also like to thank Scott Gulke, former colleague of Vanessa Bealey, who provided us with documented information on Bealey's not long ago promotions for and campaign against Syria's President Assad and her support and promotion for US-NATO-backed Arab Spring operations. Look, it is one thing for a person to change her or his position and opinion, but in this case, Vanessa Bealey, instead of owning up to her past operations and stand, false information dissemination, went about deleting and hiding all public documentations of her past. Of course, her former colleagues, her former bosses, they kept screenshots of these communications. Not only that, She begged people, she begged her former colleague to join in her secrets and never make her history public. One has to ask, why? A couple of months ago, after receiving certain reports pertaining to these two self-proclaimed journalists, and after personally experiencing highly troublesome actions and allegations by this duo, we at Newsbud began investigating this duo's real pasts, real funding, their associates, and their past reports and claims. I interviewed several dozen of sources for this research, including other alternative journalists and reputable activists intimately familiar with this duo's operations, their past colleagues, real Syrian from different sides, pro-government, anti-government, neutral Syrians, those in Syria, those in refugee camps, and Syrian expats around the world. Journalism experts as well, with expertise in ethical journalism, a board member of the Syrian Solidarity Movement, a major past donor, doctors who have been to Syria, forensic experts, and more.
Here is testimony from former Bealey and Bartlett colleague Dr. McKenzie, stating that Bealey pressured her to omit facts and censor one of her articles.
In 2016, I wrote an article referring to the liberation of Malula, and Vanessa Bealey contacted me and essentially ordered me to remove all references to Hezbollah and, in fact, initially the Syrian Arab Army, because she had been talking to someone who was there at the liberation of Malula, and she was sure it was only the local militias, with maybe a little help from the Syrian Arab Army. And I spent many hours researching what we already knew. I researched everybody from the BBC to Al-Mazda, and found that indeed the Syrian Arab Army and Hezbollah liberated Malula. But Bealey, however, didn't budge, was furious that I wouldn't change my article purely on her say-so and despite the evidence. What is even more incredible is I was not telling anyone it came from her. I don't know what I was supposed to put down as a source for this weird position I was supposed to take, but she expected me to go out on a limb, go against my better judgment, and not even rely on her to back me up. This is quite an extraordinary thing to do. It certainly doesn't sound like journalistic ethics to me. I just found the whole thing quite dishonest, really. I provided and carried on providing sources which made it very clear that Hezbollah played a major role in the liberation of Malula. None of this meant anything to Vanessa Bealey. She wanted me to change my article, to censor my article on her say-so, and most strangely, not to mention that it was on her say-so.
Vanessa Bealey and even Bartlett portray themselves as being independent and reliable journalists who have fearlessly reported from on the ground inside Syria. As you just heard from former colleague Dr. McKenzie, Vanessa Bealey was pressuring her to omit facts from her report. Why would Bealey do this? Especially when these facts were well documented, debunking Bealey's claims that Hezbollah was not involved in the liberation of Malula. This is just one example of unreliable and unethical journalistic practices by the Bealey-Bartlett duo. Another example comes from Zach, who was wrongly accused and attacked by Bealey and Bartlett, claiming that Zach betrayed Syria.
This Eva Bartlett lady accusing me of dodging the Syrian military. A lot of Syrians got disappointed when they saw that, and they contacted me. Literally, these smart journalists, if they think they're smart and investigative researchers, they didn't realize that I got this military exemption. I paid $3,000 in 2008. They don't know about it. Maybe they'll know about it now. 2008, I paid for my Syrian military exemption. And as a Syrian, I wasn't born in Syria. I didn't grow up in Syria. And if I join the military, they don't realize that, and I have a Syrian passport and I have a U.S. passport, so they could keep on going with their lies and giving people disinformation. That's proof of disinformation.
To this day, there has been no retraction issued. Perhaps the most damage was done by Bartlett when she spoke at a press conference put together by the U.S. Peace Council sponsored by the Syrian government, when Bartlett made several false claims. One of these false claims is that the Al-Quds hospital in Aleppo was never bombed.
I'm sure you've heard in the media that hospitals have been attacked. Well, this media is referring to the pockets of Aleppo that were occupied by terrorists. And they have manufactured stories, and I can give you a precise account. In April of this year, there was a hospital called the Al-Quds Hospital, which in a concerted effort, all media said was attacked and targeted and badly damaged by either the Syrians or the Russians. In fact, the Russians had satellite imagery showing that this hospital was in the same shape that it was in October 2015. No difference. Therefore, it was not attacked.
This has been thoroughly debunked with reports from Doctors Without Borders, the mainstream media, the alternative media, Syrians on the ground, and imagery. The Bealey Bartlett gang has since tried to walk back their false claims that the hospital was not bombed by saying, okay, so it was not totally destroyed. But the fact is that the hospital has suffered many attacks and has been closed and reopened several times.
Therefore, it was not attacked.
And to this day, there has been no retraction issued. Another major piece of misinformation from Bartlett at that same press conference was the accusation that children are being recycled in different reports inside Syria, stating that a young Syrian girl named Aya was used in 3 separate reports where she was allegedly being rescued after a bombing, thus rendering the rescue images and videos as faked or staged.
Children that have been recycled in different reports. So you can find a girl named Aya who turns up in a report in month, say, August, and she turns up in the next month in 2 different locations.
Now, this has also been debunked by several outlets, stating that it is beyond a reasonable doubt that these images are of 3 different girls and they are not the same girl being recycled. Now, it has been stated by members of the Syrian Solidarity Movement, as well as by Syrians and Syrian activists, that Bartlett caused great damage that day to the pro-Syrian movement by making these false claims at this press conference. This type of damage may be felt for some time, as any future legitimate exposure of staged or faked rescue operations, whether they're conducted by the White Helmets propaganda constructs or others, the credibility will always be questioned linking back to this event. When these utterly false claims were made, especially in such a public way, to this day there has been no retraction issued. These are just some of the more well-known examples. There are many more, which will be covered in future reports. We contacted Vanessa Bealey and Eva Bartlett and invited them both to be our guests to be included in this report, to provide comments and responses. Our request was ignored, the same way that they have ignored or attacked anyone who has questioned their so-called facts. We understand that nobody is perfect and sometimes mistakes are made. It happens. But there is a procedure based on journalistic ethics when errors or mistakes occur, and that is issuing a public retraction.
One of the advice we give when we conduct interviews or publish, we say, look, there is an honor about news organization reporters actually issuing retractions when it's needed. It's not a matter of ego because we all make mistakes. We are all human.
it's stories and are so easy to fix online. And then you say this story has been corrected. A previous version of this story contained inaccurate information. And then you say what the inaccurate information is and you say how you corrected it. That's very easy to do. And also the most important thing is to correct it in the archives, because other journalists will use that story in future coverage. So getting the archive corrected is crucial.
We have received many documented reports on how this duo has been stealing other researchers and independent journalists' work and research and using it as their own without providing any credit. This is called plagiarism, and it's against journalistic ethics. The white helmets were first exposed in 2014 by journalists and researchers like Corey Morningstar and Scott Gulke, aka Navsteva. This continued into mid-2015 by journalists and researchers like Max Blumenthal, Ben Norton, Rick Sterling, and others. It wasn't until after that Bealey and Bartlett began to capitalize on the work of others, combined it with their own false info, and began discrediting the sound reports exposing the white helmets by other journalists and researchers.
Almost all of what Vanessa Bealey knows about the activities of, say, the white helmets comes secondhand from Twitter warriors such as Navsteva, who keep her in the loop.
2 years ago, March 2016, one of those ladies, they privately messaged me. They wanted information that they had an idea, but they didn't get it done. I gave them just a slight hint because, to me, I didn't feel like it was too important. The people in Syria, they don't care about the white helmets. They think it's a story that you could talk about, but not be repetitive about it.
Most research on the Syrian war is done outside, including hers.
We have collected hundreds of posts and reports by Bealey and Bartlett, designated everyone, every side, every group, every activist who disagrees with their reporting, who points out to their inaccuracies, who criticizes them, who do not give 100% unconditional and unquestioning support to President Assad as terrorists. This includes not only mainstream media journalists, but everyone inside the refugee camps, outside Syria, every Syrian activist, including those who do support the Syrian government. One of their main targets has been international volunteer doctors as well. Let's take a look at a few examples.
My father was a surgeon, a doctor who always remained true to his Hippocratic oath. He went to war-torn areas every chance he got, despite my mother's objections and his children, including me, begging him not to go. I grew up among many doctors like him, and I have never come across a doctor who treated or mistreated a war victim based on the victim's sect, religion, race, or political belief. Let me tell you a highly personal story. When I was about 10, 11 years old, in Iran, the Iranian government took my father, a well-known surgeon, a well-known doctor, to this area in northwestern part of Iran, in the city called Sanandaj. During that period, there was a kind of a war between the Iranian Kurds in the area and the Iranian government. And for this war, the Iranian government needed doctors. So basically, he summoned my father to go to the area for about a week. While he was stationed in that area, in the middle of the night, my father was kidnapped and they blindfolded him. They took him for a 3-hour trip. He couldn't tell which areas he passed through. And once he got to the final location, they took the blindfold out and they asked my father to treat several wounded people badly in need of medical care. They didn't have any of this medical doctors, medics, or even any equipment. 2 days later, they put a blindfold on my father and they brought him back near the area. At that point, they put him on a horseback and told my dad how to get back to the station, to the area where the Iranian government's station was located. When my father arrived there were journalists, and during this time, even his families believed he was killed. He was asked to provide a statement. My father said that there were wounded people badly in need of medical care, and he tended to them. This was not good enough for the Iranian government at the time. They asked him to change his story. They asked him to tell the journalist that he was placed under gun. They pointed a gun at him, and the Kurdish people made him do what he had to do as a doctor. My father refused. He said, no, as a medical doctor, first of all, it is my duty to take care of anybody in need of medical care. Secondly, nobody put a gun in my head. In fact, he was not mistreated. They were very kind towards him. Basically, this was a group called terrorists by the Iranian government. Were they terrorists? It just depends on who you asked. And as it was the case with my father, with hundreds of doctors I have grown up with, I have been exposed to, when it comes to real doctors, and this counts for the majority of the doctors that I have known, their objective is to provide medical care to those in need of medical care. When a doctor tends to a wounded baby, they don't care whether that baby is a Kurdish baby, a Jewish baby, a Christian baby, a Muslim baby. So to call these doctors, and this is repeatedly done by Vanessa Beeley and Eva Bartlett, to call all these doctors, whether they are with the Doctors Without Borders or Red Crescents or Syrian medical associations, Doctors of the World, terrorists who tend only to terrorists, is one of the most false, awful, dangerous, violent, ignorant propaganda I have ever seen in my entire life.
These people are calling all of these doctors inside Syria who are not working for the Assad government terrorists. They are accusing these supposed terrorist doctors of only treating terrorists.
And especially one case, a baby whose life he couldn't save.
It got cold enough where basically the baby froze to death and died overnight. The mother asking us to please warm the baby. All we had to do was warm the baby up, and the baby would wake up. It gets to you. It was a very difficult thing to deal with.
So let me ask you, does this baby look like a terrorist to you? Does this doctor look like a terrorist to you? Well, according to Vanessa Beeley and Eva Bartlett, these doctors, their patients, and their organizations are all terrorists or support terrorists.
My father, as a surgeon, during 1980s, he went to Afghanistan. And when he went there, before he went there, he contacted some of these international organizations, such as Doctors Without Borders. And he went there for only one thing, to do and fulfill his duty as a doctor. Same with all the other doctors that I have known, I still do know, who work for various international organizations only to get help, their help to go to whatever area it is, to do what they are supposed to do as doctors. They are not going there with any kind of political objectives. These doctors, and there are thousands of these doctors, they put their lives at risk. They take away time from their safety zone, from where they are, from their practices, from their families. It's not for money. My father never got paid for it. None of the doctors that I have known, whether they are in Germany, whether they are in Sweden, whether they are in Turkey or Palestine or Iran, when they go to these war-torn areas or refugee camps, they go there with one purpose only: to administer medical help, medical care to those in need. Calling these volunteer doctors who risk it all and go to war-torn areas such as Syria terrorists is one of the most despicable acts anyone could commit. Think about it. The Western doctors, think about American doctors, many with spouses and children, many who earn six-digit salaries in their home countries, such as the United States, going to these highly dangerous, highly deadly areas for one purpose: to save lives. How could anyone with human decency paint all these doctors as terrorists and incite death, violence against them?
I met doctors from 2 or 3 different organizations, Red Cross, Médecins de la Frontière, or Doctors of the World. These journalists went too far to say something like this. Tells me that these journalists are supporting one side 100%, and maybe they never met real doctors. Here, all the doctors I met, it's what you described. They didn't care if an ill person was a Syrian or an Afghan or a Muslim or a Christian or whatever. I met 2 or 3 doctors that they may have their personal opinion, okay, but when they worked, when they were going to help, this was gone. They didn't see nothing but helping human beings, nothing more. So no, I didn't come across doctors terrorists. I hear that for the first time.
When we are looking at issues of life and death, when false reporting actually endangers hundreds on the ground, doctors or reporters, how one goes about balancing it, and really whose job is it when it becomes so urgent because it is a matter of life and death? How do we do that?
Well, I mean, it goes back to the whole tenet of our code of ethics of calling minimize harm. Journalists have to balance the public's need for information against potential harm to their colleagues, harm to other people in the community. Pursuit of news is not a license for arrogance or undue intrusiveness. I think the need to show compassion for those who are affected by news coverage.
Because there are people that actually are against Assad and, of course, are not terrorists. They just don't sympathize for the Syrian government. Everyone is terrorist for the other. You know, this label, Palestinians are terrorists for Israel. And we're talking about simple people. And this is because in a war, how can I say, you have to dehumanize someone so you can do the job. You can bomb them, you can kill them. So they're terrorists, we're okay, they're not human, we're done.
Israel is the only entity other than Vanessa Beeley and Eva Bartlett calling these doctors terrorists. The attacks by Beeley and Bartlett are not limited to only doctors. They are also accusing other journalists and entire news organizations of being terrorists, calling on their social media followers to report these journalists and news organizations to the United Kingdom government under the terror laws. When the ironic thing is that one of the members of the Beeley-Bartlett group actually has been arrested, convicted, and imprisoned for terrorism. His name is Tim Anderson, who allegedly gave the order to carry out the Sydney Hilton bombing that killed 3 people, including a police officer, and injured 11 others. Now, Anderson was mysteriously pardoned after serving 6 years in prison. Beely and Bartlett have also been unwavering in their support for Syria's Grand Mufti, who was quoted in a 2011 speech saying he would activate sleeper cells in Europe and America to carry out suicide bombings. Quote, "I say to all Europe, I say to America, we will set up our suicide bombers who are now in your countries. If you bomb Syria or Lebanon, from now on, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." Here is an image when Vanessa Beely met with and interviewed the Grand Mufti, who called for these terror attacks, who Beely supports.
Think about it. This duo has issued a terrorist fatwa against any journalist who does not agree with their debunked, dodgy, and shoddy work. They have asked people to report these journalists to the United States government, to the United Kingdom government, and they have asked these governments, this is the United States, this is England, to persecute and jail these journalists under terrorism laws. We have interviewed several sources in Syria who claim that these operatives, Beely and Bartlett, have done the same thing in Syria. We have received multiple reports, credible reports, claiming that Beely and Bartlett have done the same things. They have been reporting any competitor journalist in Syria or on the way to Syria to the Syrian government and accusing these journalists of being closet Zionists, terrorists, and asking the Syrian government to either detain and jail them or to expel them from Syria or to prevent their entry into Syria. Looking at their online posts and fatwas, we and everyone we have interviewed find these claims plausible. We are waiting for further information and documentation on this, and we are also in touch with our sources within Syrian government.
And it's not fair for these other the real journalists and activists. It's not fair for them that they worked so hard to achieve what they've done, and for these bunch of nobodies coming out of nowhere to be called journalists and an activist, it's like a disgrace.
Sharing information and urging, or at the very least suggesting, harm should come to journalists who are out doing their jobs and reporting the news is wrong. There's no other way to describe it. It is wrong and it shouldn't happen. But as far as accountability and transparency, my organization, Society of Professional Journalists, has it in their code of ethics that ethical journalism means taking responsibility for one's work and explaining your decisions to the public, responding quickly to questions about accuracy, clarity, and fairness, acknowledging mistakes, correcting them quickly and prominently, and explaining your corrections, exposing unethical conduct in your own organizations. And the biggest one is just abiding by the same high standards that you expect of other people.
If people can demand that pro-NATO journalists should be put in jail, these same people, they can demand that we all be sent to prison.
Rania Halek is an American-Lebanese writer and journalist who has covered the Israel-Palestine conflict and reported from on the ground in Syria.
Same with journalist Rania Halek. She's an alternative media reporter. She refused, and this is Halek, she refused to make her reports one-sided and approved by the Syrian government. She chose the fair and balanced approach of journalism, and that brought this response from Eva Bartlett. Have you ever seen such an ugly, profanity-ridden, and highly violence-filled post by anyone who claims to be a journalist, whether alternative media or mainstream media? We as Newsbud have never seen such level of profanity and violence by anyone who claims to be a journalist.
Syria Solidarity Movement board member Paul Arudi also confirmed these attacks against Blumenthal and Halek.
He too was attacked and smeared by both, and that other journalists, such as Max Blumenthal and Rania Halek, have all been viciously and very wrongfully targeted and attacked by both Beeley and Bartlett. Mr. Larudi also confirmed that both Bartlett and Beeley were no longer on the board of the Syrian Solidarity Movement. I also spoke with another individual connected to the Syrian Solidarity Movement who was involved with their fundraising. This is Beeley and Bartlett. He too provided me with a list of other alternative journalists and real activists who have been targets of Beeley Bartlett's smear campaigns. As far as Rania Halek goes, Beeley and Bartlett have been angry for the attention Halek has been receiving for her work and for being called pretty. I know it sounds petty, but simply because she was considered pretty. Here is one of many malicious, violent, and profanity-ridden misinformation campaigns by Eva Bartlett against Rania Halek.
We spoke with Professor of Economics Nancy Hammond, who has been an anti-war activist for more than 40 years, active with Syria's anti-war movement since the very beginning.
As I was telling you, my big surprise in activism, I've never seen such animosity and hatred and bile directed at individuals. Usually in activism, you want to expand a group. You want inclusivity, not exclusivity. And certainly you don't target people for personalities. I admired what Beeley and Bartlett were doing in the beginning. And I was also corresponding with them online and through their solidarity group. What I witnessed was this level of viciousness, the widespreadness of it, the coordinatedness, the seemingly coordinated, the exclusivity when in a political activism movement you want to build a base.
We spoke with Tony Borso, a pro-Palestine, pro-Syria activist.
My husband is Palestinian from Gaza. I've been to Gaza twice through the tunnels also. I've been there through 2 wars. Yes, some of the ugliness, like the racism, they've called them mentally ill, mentally retarded. I mean, these are supposed to be professional journalists. I've never heard a mainstream media journalist, even from, CNN, which is disgraceful. I've never heard them call someone retarded or a low-life scumbag.
In my 16 years of activism and 10 years of operating news organizations, I have never seen such a level of violence, profanity, and dangerous, very dangerous, malicious attacks, period. I have never encountered any man or woman who uses this type of language on record on daily basis against hundreds and hundreds of people, whether they are journalists, whether they are doctors, whether they are Syrian refugees, whether they are anti-war activists. They have been targeting hundreds of decent folks. They have been leaking their personal information, including people's children's information, including their home addresses. And they have been inciting violence, even death threats against these people.
I mean, they even sent a Syrian guy living in the U.S., a grown man, maybe in his 60s, sent a video threatening us, threatening me and other individuals who have exposed them.
This is the death threat video that was posted publicly online on behalf of Vanessa Beeley, Eva Bartlett, and the convicted terrorist Tim Anderson. The man in this video calls for the hanging and execution of Syrian activists. This video was removed from the internet due to the death threats.
This secret group called Jabhat al-Daoud Abuse Alert. And it was a private group. They were conspiring and say, hey, let's take down his post. And they freaking bullied a lot of people. Get rid of this guy, get rid of that guy. They listed 300 names in that group to just delete or block.
It's interesting that you say that the 2B's issue fatwa is exactly like mirroring what they say that they're. Not only do you not trash people in your own movement, but you don't make them unsafe. or compromise their safety.
I have seen cases of death threats asking for hanging of certain individuals.
I have too.
They are asking for certain activists to be hung. And these are actually, some of these activists are real Syrian activists who are pro-President Assad. So it's not mainstream media people, but they are actually going after real Syrian activists, real anti-war Syrian activists, and they're asking people to kill them. I have never seen such a thing.
We also spoke with Kelly McDissey. She is the daughter of a prominent retired general in Syria and a pro-Syria activist who resides in the UK. She had this to say: "Through no fault of my own, unprovoked, just because I advised an officer in my family's community, the Syrian military, my family and I suffered malicious, vicious attacks online from Eva Bartlett and her proxies, including a hacker who referred to the situation with Eva and then threatened my children and my house. This was after Bartlett announced that I was, quote, toxic, poison, and have verbal diarrhea, and would unfriend all who are friends with me. Suddenly, a newly created fake Facebook account contacted my husband, telling him I was having an affair with a soldier in Syria. I rang 101 here in the UK and reported the incident. My entire family was attacked." And this is coming from a Syrian whose father was a prominent general in Assad's army.
They've done everything to terrorize and to, harm people. And not by doing it there directly, but, just putting out these information. You can only expect that harm will come when you do these things. They don't abide by the standards of any journalism that I know, because no journalist that I would know gives the real names of people or when they are in war zones and everything. They lie even more than mainstream media. So basically what they've done, they have really damaged the pro-Syria movement doing this. They have damaged and they have divided. And that is the worst thing, that they have divided.
Ghassan Qadi is a highly respected Syrian scientist, activist, and acclaimed author. His analysis and articles have been published by various independent channels such as Zero Hedge and Saker.
I much prefer to keep this impersonal because I refuse to stoop to their level. Needless to say that the unethical, vicious conducts, as you describe them, came from many sources, and not only those two persons you are referring to. They didn't stop at making false and unsubstantiated accusations against us, but they descended to making threats to our friends if they don't unfriend us. They even exposed our identities. They published our photos and addresses. They even published photos of our cat. It was as if they were inviting criminal and terrorist elements to go out and get us, or at least manage to scare us enough to be silenced.
They have been targeting Newsbud as well. They shamelessly leaked my private email address online. Some of the documents we have seen are just too violent and so profanity-ridden to even share here in this report. We would be banned from YouTube or Twitter for sharing their violence-ridden material. We have gathered the exact Syria entries and travel log in Syria, their visas, and spoken with their former associates in Syria, their fixers, and contrary to their claim, neither has been in area with any terrorist presence. 76+% of their time has been spent in Lebanon and in Damascus Christian neighborhoods on fine hotels and dinings. Their tourist day trips have been escorted by Syrian authorities and their fixers, Sinan Said. Yet, during their PR interviews, they have been misrepresenting all this.
She's been to places that have been liberated already. It hasn't been like there's no terrorists around there. Then I don't think they have the heart to go to these places where there's terrorists around. I believe that they're using the government, trying to get like these TV interviews, and that definitely they might have a fixer in there that's helping them out with it. There might be a money share going on.
There's all this bragging about going to Syria, sneering about others who haven't been. The trip is well documented. Bailey had spent a week in Damascus, maybe half a day in Malula as part of a package tour, and a week in Beirut where she met a man who may or may not have been in Malula during liberation.
So you have Vanessa Beeley and Eva Bartlett, a Brit and a Canadian. Two self-proclaimed journalists who until recently couldn't even find Syria on a map, calling the majority of Syrians, whether pro-Assad, whether refugees, journalists, activists, or expats, not real Syrians.
Accusing other people, even to saying that, oh, well, he's not even Syrian or she's not even Syrian. Well, you guys are not even Syrian. So what? And at least these certain individuals, they're from the region. They know about the region. If they're Palestinian, they have the right to get involved with Syria because it relates to what's happening in Palestine. And same thing with Lebanon.
Very true.
Middle East. So they have no right to, attack. I mean, I think they're taking advantage of this crisis. They want to make money. They have an agenda.
If they say things to you like, well, those people are not the real Syrians, red flag.
Yes, and they've been saying that a lot.
Yes, and those are the people you want to stay away from because they will lie to you. And from my experience, those people, they're like Israeli Zionists. They lie, and have no problem doing it. Whereas if you really want to know what's going on, talk to the refugees. Talk to the Syrian refugees who have been virtually silenced. The media does not really report their stories except in that sort of war porn type way.
We have had former colleagues, Syrians, and Syrian activists all state that Vanessa Beeley and Eva Bartlett's main interests are self-promotion and making money from the Syrian crisis.
For me, as I saw them, I just saw them arrogant, egomaniacs, mythomaniacs, people who are just trying to become famous, just from a war. That's how I saw them.
These people, many of them, are virtue signalers. They are there to be seen there and to insert themselves into the narrative. It's called mythomania. Okay, I explained this in great detail on Sunday, where the motivation is not to go to the country, to try and understand what's really going on there, to get both sides of any story, but rather to signal or to signify to their following, small as it might be, that they are worthwhile. That's what mythomania is. Mythomania is convincing others of your worth and inserting yourself into the story.
These activists use Syria as an opportunity to make money. I mean, why don't these activists ever go to Libya? Would they be brave enough to go to Libya? No, they won't, because there's no stable government that will protect them. They don't want no foreign activists or journalists to get hurt or injured. So they're always protected when they come to Syria. So then they brag about that. Oh, we risked our lives.
About the motivation of people like some of the people who've been on this program in the past who go to places like Syria and triumphantly proclaim themselves to be working for the greater good and challenging the narrative about Syria and about the Assad government and all of that. But in fact, are not doing that at all. In fact, are there and are there only. One of the things, you see, she rung off there because she wouldn't have been able to hold an argument with me when I challenged her about her contention that these people were in grave danger when they were in Syria. They were in no grave danger whatsoever. They had, as far as I understand, when these people go to Syria, they go to Damascus, they go to strictly government-held parts of the country, and they are well taken care of while they are there.
And they're using these Syrians to get information and then using it as their own.
This, I wouldn't in the sense call it a cabal, but this is a group that is just organizing and rehashing information, the same information, and it's directed towards others. I want to call this something else, but it's not a political movement. I would like people to understand that this is not activism.
Alternative media is about finding and sharing truth that's ignored or distorted by the mainstream media. Vanessa Beeley indicated to Nevsteva that Bashar al-Assad knew there was torture going on in Syrian prisons. I don't remember the details. What else did she say? I'm not at liberty to tell you what the president said to me. So, implying that Bashar al-Assad told an activist blogger on their first, probably only meeting, secrets that she couldn't share with the world. Anyway, it's quite funny.
It is so very ironic and hypocrisy-ridden when this duo blames the funding of Western mainstream media, when their trips and work are partially paid by a government, in this case by the Syrian government. Other funding sources such as Syrian Solidarity Movement and the Communist Party of Great Britain are similarly never disclosed by these two. They engage in these fundraising and telling people that they are paying for their trips from their own pockets by donations coming from individuals on GoFundMe, etc. We have interviewed many people. We have already established large sums being contributed to them from various parties. None of them can in any way be considered just by their own pocket money and by ordinary citizens. Due to many letters and documented reports by many Syrians, the Syrian government is currently investigating Vanessa Beeley and Ivo Bartlett. We as Newsbud have also reached out to our sources within the government in Syria with inquiries. We will be updating you on this, so please stay tuned. There are many Syrians who have started a campaign writing to their government, writing to their president, asking them to stop this duo, Beeley and Bartlett, from destroying Syria's reputation. And the government there is listening. These Syrians, as other sources within the government in Syria, now have realized that this duo have been nothing but disgrace and liability by putting out, disseminating false information, profanity-ridden language, and libelous attacks.
I believe some certain officials or certain, I can't speak of everyone, but I believe they're looking into this. Maybe they find something suspicious about this. Maybe they want to let some of these individuals come back to Syria so they could keep their eye more on what their operations are. I don't know how the Syrian government operates, but I want to believe that they would not want to let them in their country, not because of, well, first, it will be liability to Syrian people. That's a no-brainer. But also, they'll ruin the government's reputation. Why would you want to let these people back in? I mean, you've seen everything, what they're all about. You're going to be, you already have enough on your plate with the world against you, the US, all these foreign countries. You got the terrorists.
Yeah, well, obviously, they are committed to a cause, and they don't care. They don't care if lives are lost. You know, when you are committed to a cause, no matter what. And I don't know, maybe they're getting money.
Any legitimate information platform giving these two fraudulent operatives a platform is damaging their reputation and engaging in dissemination of fraud, false information.
Many sites have provided a platform for Vanessa Beeley and Eva Bartlett and are likely not aware of much of the content in this report. We hope that in light of this report, these sites will not only refrain from having them on in the future, but that they will either add a disclaimer in light of this information or retract their posts altogether to salvage their credibility.
Well, my advice to them is if they want to keep going, these news outlets, and they want to, have a good reputation, is first get to know who these people are exactly. That don't just see them for what they post on Facebook. Do your own research. Ask for evidence of the background education, experience. They need to figure who these individuals are, because in the end, if they want to keep going as news outlets, if these two ladies are not good or legitimate, they're going to be embarrassed, these outlets. They don't represent me or any other Syrian. What I think they represent is nobody but themselves. They're going into business for themselves, and I don't know who's the real person calling all the shots, who's moving them around. But I think they're slipping up a lot, and the way with their attitude towards Syrians. If you're an actual journalist or an activist, you're supposed to respect the people of that country
Well, it can only bring an organisation into disrepute if they use people who are known to be sloppy in their work, but who also have a reputation for lying and defaming and vindictiveness on a personal level. That must discredit the organisation that uses them.
This duo has been accusing everyone of being terrorists. That includes us. While for the last 2 years, they are the ones who have been terrorizing innocent people online.
These are so-called activists. They want to own the cause, and they want to drown out any Syrian that causes a threat to them. They're bringing harm and causing it to be a big liability, not just the Syrian people, and to the government.
Sloppy journalism really hurts. Really hurts the cause.
How do you police something? I don't know.
Unlike Bealey and Bartlett, we are not asking governments, whether it's Syria, the United States, or England, to take action and stop this duo from spreading violence and false information and terrorizing and endangering people. Unlike them, we are not going to ask mega corporations such as Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter to put a stop at these vicious, violent, and malicious operations carried out by this duo.
There is now a greater realization that these social media sites are publishers. They are publishers of information. And as such, the growing sentiment is that they should be held to the same standards as other publishers, such as a large media outlet, a television station, an online news outlet. Twitter and especially Facebook have come to the realization of the role they play as a publisher of information or misinformation or disinformation. So I think we're going to see that there are going to be limits, either self-imposed or imposed by somebody else. The freewheeling, anything goes, Wild West approach to these social media sites is very quickly coming to an end.
If you guys want this war to stop and you want Syria to go back to the way it was, you need to expose these dangerous elements, these fake activists, these fake journalists. You need to speak up. You need to help out your government, the Syrian government, and notifying them about these individuals.
But we are asking you, the people, you, the community members, anybody who believes in and is committed to human decency, any of you who is against online violence, profanity, and terrorizing, to take it upon yourself, to make it your priority to stop this operation. Do whatever you deem appropriate for the sake of thousands of Syrian civilians, hundreds of decent journalists and activists whose lives have been endangered, dozens of doctors who have been facing death threats.
We're living in very polarizing times right now. It's a very us and them. That makes things much more difficult because this idea or the sentiment of either you're for us or against us is very, very harmful.
Syrian patriots must be aware of all wolves dressed in sheep clothing. What is ironic here is that despite their different agendas, all different covert operatives who are under the guise of defending Syria have engaged in the tactics you have mentioned. They all banded together against genuine Syrian activists, exactly like how the original anti-Syrian cocktail, as I named them, banded together 7 years ago, united only by their hatred for Syria.
While covering and exposing groups who are operating under false pretenses like the White Helmets has been important, there are many other issues inside Syria that are far more important, such as the violations of Syria's sovereignty by other nations and the indiscriminate killing of civilians by all sides. The time is now to fight against dishonest media.